For nearly 20 years, federal investigators chased a ghost, a man with no fingerprints in the system, no eyewitness trail, no predictable pattern, only a series of explosions that seemed to erupt from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. He was patient, he was methodical, he was invisible. Long before the world knew his name, he had already begun crafting what he believed would be the perfect war against modern society. The man who would later be identified as Ted Kaczynski did not begin his campaign with spectacle. In 1978, a small homemade explosive device detonated at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It was crude, assembled from simple materials, but it carried a chilling message. Someone out there was experimenting, testing, refining. At first it seemed like an isolated incident, but it wasn't. Over the next 17 years, packages would arrive at universities and airline-related offices across the United States. Brown paper, handwritten addresses, no return name. Inside, carefully constructed bombs, each one more sophisticated than the last. The targets appeared random, yet they were not entirely without theme. Professors, computer scientists, airline executives, individuals linked, in one way or another, to advancing technology and industrial systems. Fear began to spread. 3 people would ultimately lose their lives. Nearly 24 others would be injured, some permanently disfigured, some psychologically scarred beyond repair. Offices were evacuated. Mailrooms became scenes of anxiety. Airlines tightened security. The threat of a device detonating mid-flight was no longer the stuff of fiction. It was a real possibility whispered in briefings and emergency meetings. Federal authorities realized they were not facing a typical criminal. They were up against someone intelligent, disciplined, and ideologically driven. The investigation was handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which formed a special task force known as Unabomber, that stands for University and Airline Bombings. What started as a small inquiry soon grew into one of the most extensive and, honestly, complex manhunts in American history. More than 150 investigators eventually worked the case. Agents teamed up with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, as well as the United States Postal Inspection Service. Forensic experts analyzed fragments of metal, bits of wood and scraps of wiring. Behavioral profilers tried to reconstruct the mind behind the bombs. Was he educated? Was he a loner? Did he live in a city? Or somewhere remote? But, every clue seemed to dissolve. The devices were built from ordinary materials: scrap wood, nails, pieces of pipe, handmade switches. There were no commercial parts that could be traced to a single store, no fingerprints, no DNA. The bomber wore gloves, sanded down surfaces, and destroyed evidence before it could even exist. He avoided surveillance, mailed packages from distant locations, and always paid in cash. He seemed to really understand investigative procedures, and deliberately stayed one step ahead. Years passed. The media coined a name, the Unabomber. The public imagined a madman hiding in the shadows of a city, but the reality was something else entirely. Far from urban centers, in a tiny primitive cabin near Lincoln, Montana, a man lived without electricity, without running water, without modern comforts. He hunted rabbits, he chopped wood, he read books by candlelight, and he wrote, obsessively. To understand this man, investigators would later look back at his early life. A mathematical prodigy, a student who entered Harvard University at just 16 years old. Quiet, brilliant, socially withdrawn. He later earned a doctorate from the University of Michigan and became a professor at the University of California, Berkeley. Yet, despite what many would consider success, he resigned abruptly in his 20s, rejecting academic life entirely. He retreated from society, but his withdrawal was not peaceful isolation. It was ideological rebellion. In his mind, industrial society was enslaving humanity. Technology was stripping people of autonomy. Machines were replacing meaning, and those who promoted technological advancement were complicit in a system he viewed as destructive. The bombs were not random acts of chaos. They were statements. He retreated from society, but his withdrawal was not peaceful isolation. It was ideological rebellion. In his mind, industrial society was enslaving humanity. Technology was stripping people of autonomy. Machines were replacing meaning. Still, law enforcement struggled. Behavioral profiles suggested the bomber might be highly educated, perhaps linked to academia, possibly living alone, but thousands of Americans fit that description. The task force sifted through mountains of tips, disgruntled employees, eccentric professors, reclusive neighbors. Nothing stuck. Then came 1995. So, a package arrived at the New York Times and another at the Washington Post. Inside was this 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The author demanded it be published in full. If his words were printed nationwide, he promised to stop the bombings. But if not, the attacks would just keep going. The document was, well, dense, philosophical, angry. It criticized modern technology, mass media, leftist politics, and corporate power structures. The argument was that technological progress was eroding human freedom, and that only a radical dismantling of the system could restore balance. But it wasn't the rant of someone incoherent. It was structured, analytical, cold. The decision to publish was, honestly, pretty controversial. Would giving a terrorist a platform just reward violence, or maybe could it help identify him? After some careful deliberation, Attorney General Janet Reno and FBI Director Louis Freeh approved publication. In September of 1995, newspapers all across the country carried the full manifesto. And yet, it was language, not forensic science, that ultimately caught him. Not fingerprints, not DNA, words, a brother's recognition, a pattern in phrasing, the subtle fingerprint of thought embedded in text. The Unabomber task force, once frustrated by years of dead ends, had finally achieved closure. It became one of the longest-running and most resource-intensive investigations in FBI history. It demonstrated both the limits and the power of criminal profiling. It showed that patience, years of meticulous work, can eventually pierce even the thickest veil of secrecy. But beyond law enforcement, the case forced society to confront uncomfortable truths. In an era of rapid technological growth, anxiety about machines and systems was not uncommon. Many shared concerns about automation, surveillance, loss of privacy. Yet almost none chose violence as an answer. The line between critique and extremism can be thin, but it exists. Crossing it transforms thought into harm. The cabin in Montana became a symbol. It was later moved to a museum exhibit, preserved as evidence of how isolation and ideology can intersect with tragedy. The handwritten journals remain studied by experts trying to understand the mindset of someone who believed destruction was justified in pursuit of philosophical purity. For nearly 20 years, families checked their mail with hesitation. Universities reviewed security protocols, airlines evaluated vulnerabilities, investigators worked weekends, holidays, long nights chasing fragments of metal and strands of logic. And in the end, the shadow was unmasked not by force, but by recognition. A brother who chose responsibility over loyalty, an institution willing to publish dangerous words for a greater good, analysts who read between lines, agents who refused to give up. On April 3, 1996, when handcuffs closed around Ted Kaczynski's wrists, it marked more than the arrest of a fugitive. It marked the end of an era defined by uncertainty and fear. It marked the conclusion of a 17-year campaign of terror carried out by a man who believed he was at war with modernity. In 1998, when he accepted life imprisonment, the courtroom fell silent. No dramatic outburst, no final speech, just a quiet acknowledgement that the long pursuit was over. Yet the legacy of the Unabomber case continues to echo. It reshaped investigative techniques. It underscored the importance of interagency cooperation. It highlighted the potential of forensic linguistics, and it remains a chilling reminder that intelligence without empathy can become something dangerous. For nearly 2 decades, America searched for a ghost. What they found was not a monster in the conventional sense, but a human being who allowed ideology to eclipse humanity. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all.